Welcome. My name is Maren Gube, and today we bring you a short video on accessible teaching and learning online. With the unplanned shift to remote teaching in the spring of 2020, university students suddenly lost their familiar routines and their learning communities. Now, many students are still experiencing difficulties adjusting. At the same time, professors and staff are working harder than ever to try to bring engaging and inclusive learning experiences that still allow for community and collaboration. So with me today, remotely of course, is Dr. Julia Phelan. Julia has a PhD in educational psychology from UCLA, where she worked as a research scientist for many years. More recently, she co-founded 211, which is a learning engineering company that helps apply learning science to teaching and learning. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much.
We're going to discuss a couple of themes today. The first one is on engagement and collaboration. Now, it can be tempting to just record your lectures and put them up there for the students to see and then give them the list of assignments and off you go. But Julia, what would you suggest to a professor who wants to create a more engaged and more collaborative online community in his or her courses?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you today about these important topics and how we can support student learning during these challenging times. And I think, to frame the conversation first is I just want to underscore that any of the considerations that we normally have when we're thinking about and designing learning experiences for students apply no matter how the students are learning, right? Either online or in person. So in any situation, we really need to start with, how does learning work? And not just how we would like it to work, but how it really, really works, right? And then we can figure out, are there any conditions or constraints imposed by the particular environment, in this case, being online, that mean we need to maybe make some adjustments or some tweaks? And I like to think about it as sort of that there are these sort of multiple sliders, and we have different considerations when we're designing a learning experience. And in an online environment, we may think, okay, we need to move a little bit down on our slider for ways that we can engage students, right? Because we need to think about what are we missing or what are we losing or what's the potential to get lost when we move to this online environment, right? And I think one of the key things there is the connection with the students. So you mentioned that in your question, that we're used to in a face-to-face teaching environment having chats with the students at the beginning of the class or at the end of class, or having more of an opportunity to look around, get feedback as an instructor, and call on people, ask questions, and sort of you can kind of gauge, right, how your material is being received, when you're teaching something, by if everyone's nodding or if everyone's looking puzzled. And you lose a lot of that in the online environment, but there are ways that we can help make sure that students feel a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And it's really, the teacher-student relationship is really, the cornerstone of developing any kind of learning experience, because it really connects into student motivation. And for students, if a student has barriers, to engaging in a learning experience, it doesn't matter how great of a learning experience you've created, because, if a student cannot actually kind of get over that barrier and engage in it, then, it's all for naught.
So what are some of the strategies that you would specifically suggest for that?
So I think that really thinking about, okay, again, every student having different reasons that they might be feeling, unmotivated, or might be feeling that they cannot, connect. And so there are things that you can do, like, thinking about, let's say, your syllabus. When you're designing your syllabus, there are ways that you can provide structure and be very, very clear about your expectations for the course in a sort of friendly, welcoming way, right? So rather than just saying when your office hours are, for example, telling students that you welcome the opportunity to get to know them, right? During even if it's just your virtual office hours. And then creating, if you have a discussion board, let's say for your online class, creating questions that students really would be interested in, and then you yourself as the instructor, making sure that you're participating in those discussions and not just reading them, but actually contributing and giving students feedback and follow up. And creating opportunities for students to participate and contribute just as you would in a face-to-face environment. So let's say if normally you ask students questions and maybe have them raise their hand, in a online environment you can still pose questions, and if you want to make it a little bit less stressful for students who maybe have anxiety about participating, you can use clickers in Zoom classes, so you can ask questions and have students just anonymously respond. And that has a couple of benefits. One, it helps to sort of get students engaged and listen and think about the questions you're asking. And it can also give the students some opportunity to see, like, wow, I had a misunderstanding about this, and I see that half of the class did too, right? So thinking about ways that you can get students to participate, but also get some feedback on their own learning.
Yeah, I think that that feedback and that participation is obviously a very critical point here, and that really brings us to our second theme, which is active learning, right? We know from the research that active learning promotes long-term student success. We know that it decreases the rates of dropout and also of student failures. So what are some specific suggestions that you could offer to make active learning more accessible in this online environment that we're in now?
Yeah, and I think that when we think about active learning, it can mean all sorts of different things to different people, but I like to think about it just as it's having students actually doing something, right? Actually engaging and participating in the learning experience. So, it might be some sort of scavenger hunt type activity that you could do, where you could have students go and find things in their home or wherever they are and kind of collect things and bring them back. And that could be a team activity, right? And you can assign different points to stuff like that, but getting students to actually have to do something. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to bring in like video clips from movies. So any movie I'm watching, I'll be all the time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this a good example that I could use in when I'm teaching somebody something to help them sort of make a connection or see, maybe understand something that they may have misconceptions about.
Yeah, to really sort of make it authentic and bring it into their lived experiences as well.
Right. And also get them, I think it's important to get people to see that, that whatever you're learning about doesn't just exist within that classroom environment, whatever type of classroom it is, it exists in the real world. And there are lots of applications you can make to, something that you see in a movie or a TV show or you read about in the newspaper. But again, making a connection and helping students see that what they're doing, is relevant and authentic, in whatever discipline that you're in. And I think another way to really sort of promote this kind of active learning and active participation is to, give demonstrations and have students sort of learn about a concept and kind of see it in action. So if you're describing, let's say, some psychological phenomenon that produces some effect, you can actually, rather than just talking about it, you can have students engage in a brief experiment, where you show them stimuli and you have them remember things or whatever it might be. And again, rather than just telling them like how that particular thing works, they actually get to see it and they actually get to experience it, which I think can be just a really powerful experience for them.
Well, right, exactly. And the important key thing again being that they are actively involved the whole time and experiencing it for themselves. But, one of the issues that a lot of people, I think a lot of faculty are struggling with is this whole thing of how do you bring in assessment in this kind of environment, right? Because, we used to have these, end of term, big final exams that would be, worth 50, 60, 70% of your grade. And clearly that's not an option when you're looking at online. So how do you think we could be thinking about assessment in this environment that we are now finding ourselves in?
So I think one of the, if we try and look for a silver lining in all of this, the situation that's been happening in the world in the last few months, or maybe more than a few months now, is that it's giving a lot of people an opportunity to sort of think maybe a little bit more purposefully about some of their practices. And I think assessment is one of those areas where, when we start to think about, okay, does the type of assessment maybe that we've been giving in the face-to-face environment, does that work in the online environment? Maybe, maybe not. And it gives us, this chance to think about, well, what are some of the better practices that maybe we could implement? So, if we have more frequent, sort of lower stakes assessment opportunities throughout a semester or throughout a term, that has many benefits. One, it gives students a little bit more information that they can actually act on, in real time about if they're struggling, or if, how they're doing. So they don't wait till the very, very end and then get this sort of rude awakening if they weren't doing so well or weren't understanding things as well as they might. And it also can reduce some of that anxiety. And when we reduce the anxiety and we try and help students see that we're giving them sort of checks for understanding along the way to really help them to engage in that learning process, then it feels less of a sort of a contentious situation, and more that that you're all on the same page and you're all trying to achieve the same goal. And I think another really important point about assessment, particularly now, when we're having to think about alternative ways to do it, is, what are some projects or activities or assignments that we can give to students that will allow them to really, demonstrate and show their voice. We can give them some choices in the type of things that we're asking them to do. So, as long as we're aligning to the same goals, we can have them maybe make a short video, or maybe they're going to do a presentation to the class, or maybe they're going to write something, but depending on what they feel comfortable doing, but you can still have them demonstrating their understanding of whatever your particular goals are.
Exactly. So that really supports the principles of universal design for learning, of course, which is this framework that I think a lot of professors are looking at more now, where you can really look at multiple ways of arriving at your destination, basically, and being a bit more creative maybe in coming up with how it is that you want your students to demonstrate that they have actually been learning what you were hoping that they would have been learning all along.
Right. And, it helps to, some students might have, greater levels of anxiety about, a particular type of assignment versus another one. And so it just allows you to give students some options for how they want to demonstrate that they know, what you want them to know. Absolutely.
Julia, let me ask you, what are some of the ways, because obviously emotions are running maybe higher now under these circumstances than they generally would in a learning situation. What are some of the things that are affecting how students are learning in the sort of emotional motivational sphere? What are people looking at?
So I mean, one of the things that we were talking a little bit earlier about motivation, right? And so when there are things that can get in the way of student motivation, and one of those things is if I'm in a negative emotional state, then it's very difficult for me to learn anything, because I only have a limited capacity in my brain, right? So as for a student, if a student is spending all of their valuable brain cycles worrying about, do I even belong in this environment? Are there people in this school or in this, whatever your situation is, who are like me? Do I feel like I'm an outsider? And all of these things. Do I even understand the expectations of this learning environment, right? And if the answer to any of those things is no, then it's going to be very, very difficult for that student to engage in, even if you have the most fantastic course, because they're spending all of their energies on worrying about these other things. So, some of the ways that, we can sort of help foster that is, again, that we look at these teacher-student relationships, right? That it's really important for students to understand that teachers really care about them. And in this particular, environment over these past few months, it's just all that more important for students to get the message that, okay, we're not just in an educational environment where you're my teacher and I'm a student and that's sort of the end of it, but
like an institution of sorts.
that you can see the teacher as a human being, and as a professor, you can share things about your own personality and your own journey and your own history, right? And students, if a student can see that perhaps someone who they look up to, like a professor, has experienced their own failures or experiences their own anxieties during these times, it can help you not to feel like you're an outsider, right? It can help you feel like, I do belong in this environment. But if you feel that you're the only one who's experiencing certain things, it can be very isolating and lonely, and also it won't allow you to learn anything because you're spending all of your available brain worrying about other things. So
well, exactly. So really maybe for professors to remember to be, extra human. Like professors are always human, but they need to sort of be really intentional about, even in the wording of their syllabus and everything that they do, to really kind of remind the students that, hey, like, I know this is an unusual time. We're all doing our best here. Let's make this happen. And really being purposeful about those kinds of activities. And even things, we're always saying, this is a collaborative thing. Here, go off into your team. Like, do you have suggestions for things that professors could do to help their groups work better together in terms of collaborative skills?
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things there is to really, in any situation, but really to help students understand, what are some of the reasons that a collaborative or a team exercise is going to be a good thing, right? And also give them some strategies and tools to help make that experience, a better one for them. So, it's good if you can have, if you can assign roles to different people in the teams, and then the roles kind of, in each time you get the teams together, or the groups together, you can switch around the roles. So the person who is the most gregarious doesn't always kind of take over everything, right? And small group collaboration can be really good for students who have a little bit of anxiety about sort of, putting their voice out there in front of a larger group. And so sometimes, if you can even begin with, okay, let's go into a smaller group. If you're in Zoom, it can just be a breakout room, right? And have them, then be able to maybe share something personal with a smaller group, which for some students is just feels a little bit more manageable. So I think, definitely having the different roles, helping students understand, what are some of the kind of rules and guidelines for being in a group, making sure that people are pulling their weight and contributing, and having a sort of a teacher presence, in these groups can also be helpful. So, if you're the instructor, you can sort of pop into these groups if you're doing virtual groups and sort of, listen a little bit and just contribute a little bit. But, then at least the students can feel that you're also connected to that experience too.
Right, exactly. So you're not sort of saying, here, it's group work, go off and do it.
Right. And helping, I think we always have to imagine that, in anything that we do, we shouldn't imagine that everybody would be great at doing, group work or group projects, right? That we should give students supports up front to help them succeed in those situations.
Be a bit more explicit, really, about what it is that we're hoping that they'll do.
I was just going to say one other thing about the group and collaborative activity, again, is thinking about, when you're designing things that you're going to have students work on in groups, making sure that the project itself really lends itself to that, right? So it's not just that you've started with the idea of doing a group project and then you're sort of throwing any question in there, but you're thinking about something that really will benefit from having, different perspectives, or really has, elements that will allow people to have these different roles, and it won't just be sort of everybody's doing the same thing.
That's really critical, I think, to make sure that when you do group work, it's for a good reason, because I think group work has a bit of a, bad name among students, and for many reasons. But one of them is that, everything has suddenly been made into group work because there's less grading, right? So let's not do that. Let's be, again, intentional about why we are assigning certain assignments and look at it from a purposeful point of view.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that students feel that, you know, everyone's going to have a role, and everyone will be, you know, held accountable to that, and people won't be able to, you know, sort of skate off and not do what they were supposed to be doing, because that's one of
on the coattails of someone else, exactly. And still at the same time providing many different ways, and it's a complicated puzzle, but there are tips and tricks out there. Now I know that we have a super short time for this video today, but Julia and I are going to be working together to put together a handout with more specific tips and tricks that hopefully will help make this online experiment a little bit more successful. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Julia?
I think, as I said it earlier, I think it's an opportunity for us to examine our practices and think a little bit more, you know, carefully and purposefully about, you know, are we making sure that, you know, we're taking into consideration the diversity of the population of learners that we have, and making sure that everyone feels welcome, everyone feels that they can participate, and you know, understands the expectations of the experience, and is able to demonstrate that they've achieved them. You know, I think that all of those things are really important in any learning environment, and I just think that when we make this shift, we just have to be a little bit more focused in certain areas to make sure that, you know, things don't sort of fall through the cracks, so that we really you know, take care and make sure that we're not missing anything.
Well, exactly, and really maybe a time for professors to show a little bit more sort of human, vulnerable sides of themselves to really, you know, bring in everybody fully, rather than, you know, having this sort of distant formal situation in the learning environment. And I think if everybody's engaged and committed, then chances of a positive outcome are going to be that much better as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the practical strategies that you had mentioned earlier, Julia, was polling. Are there specific things that you've done with it that you've seen work particularly well that you could suggest?
Yeah, and I've actually done it with a lot of different types of questions, but it was sort of interesting, and this is probably a sort of a more of a meta kind of point for this discussion, but in one learning science workshop I was doing, we were talking about the importance of teacher-student relationships. And I asked the students, you know, can you think of a teacher who you really liked, or who inspired you or motivated you to learn? And thinking about what were some of the characteristics, right, of the teacher which positively impacted you. And so I had people using the poll everywhere that I had connected into, I think it was a PowerPoint. And then how that works is, then as all the responses come in, and the participants could, you know, enter as many words as they wanted to, and you could see all of the different features that were coming up that were of these teachers who had a positive impact on them. And caring was probably the number one word that bubbled up to the surface. Challenging, understanding, fun, empathy, humble. But again, all of these things are, I think, important considerations when we think about that teacher-student relationship piece, that, you know, we want students to see teachers as human. It's important for teachers to, you know, share a little bit of their personality, make things fun, right? And you know, help students see that they're human beings too, that these times that we're in are challenging for them as well, and that we're, you know, all sort of working towards a common goal. We're on the same page. So I sort of used it to kind of articulate that and some of those features of positive teachers relationship.
Yeah, that's super important, and it's interesting to see that on the list you were not seeing things like you know, he or she is very highly viewed in the research world, or, you know, they have a degree from such and such a place. Those are not the things that students are valuing in the teachers from whom they learn the most.
Right. And I think, as I said earlier, you know, I think that you know, giving students examples from your own life about, you know, challenges that you've overcome. And, you know, we want students to develop a growth mindset, right? We want students to feel that, you know, they can do what we want them to do, and they can engage in it, and people like them, you know, can succeed.
And I think that when we talk to students really explicitly about, times that we've had some challenges, or give them stories of other people who've had challenges and have overcome them, it really helps to establish that growth mindset, which is really key to, student motivation, which again, if students aren't motivated to engage and learn, then
then nothing happens. Exactly. I mean, really we need to be so careful to provide that psychological safety that allows people to feel like they can make mistakes and not be made fun of, for example, and really maybe to rethink this whole idea of mistakes as actually welcome signposts on the road of learning, because it's like, oh no, that didn't work, what did I learn from this, how can I move forward?
Right, which connects back to the assessment part, right? That when we're giving students very frequent opportunities to demonstrate what they know and to get feedback. And, and again, this is where the polling thing comes in too, right? That we can ask students questions, during the learning experience, and, have them respond in real time. And then they are then faced with, maybe they understand something, but maybe they don't. And it can be, as much as we can give students feedback on where they are on this sort of learning progression as we can, the better, right? Like we're not trying to trick them, and we're not trying to wait till the very end and then say, haha, you've
exactly. No, we're trying to give them many different ways, many different opportunities to show how much they actually have learned and what they can do.
Right. Exactly.
That whole sort of positive mindset, as opposed to, oh, tricked you, fooled you.
Yeah.
Or I'm sure you've heard of professors who used to be very proud at, the average in my class is only a 65 because, I'm so tough. And I'm like really hoping that professors like that were sort of more in my generation of students and have now developed into more human and more empathetic sort of teachers.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Something I was thinking about in terms of the, being on Zoom and the online environment is, even just thinking about considerations of, where your students are in the world or the country and where they're, connecting from, and just being a little bit flexible in maybe when you're scheduling things and things like that. I don't know if that's something that we want to talk about, but I think it's important to, again, if you've previously, always had your lectures, in your office hours at certain times, now thinking about, do you have students who are currently, in Asia or somewhere else where, the time zone makes it really difficult for them to, connect with you during the time that you're used to giving your class.
Exactly.
So having some options there.
Correct. That added layer of the synchronous versus asynchronous learning, and students being here and there. You had mentioned office hours. I just read somewhere also that people are now suggesting we should call it student hours, because a lot of students are still thinking, oh, office hours are the hours when the professor is in his or her office working. But if it's student hours, then it's more welcoming, and then students are actually more likely to take advantage of those and go and have that chat or that question or whatever. We can always suggest that.
Yeah. And another thing I was thinking about and this is now sort of back when we're in a face-to-face situation, but I think there are ways that we can, sort of use some of these strategies is, I know my husband does something with his class at UCLA where he has lunches with the students. He has them sign up for these lunches, and he figures he's going to eat lunch anyway, so why not eat lunch with some students? And so every week he'll have a little sign-up sheet, and then students can sign up, and he has, I think, six students each time. And the rule is they can talk about anything, but they cannot talk about the class, right? So that's off the table. And so it's an opportunity for him to really get to know, what are these students thinking about? What are they concerned about? What music are they listening to? All the different things. And so I think that, even when we're not in a face-to-face situation, we can still do things like that, have a Zoom student hour, like you say, and, maybe some of the times it's just hey, meet the professor, get to know them, versus let's just kind of go through, points from the previous class or something like that. But, again, the teacher gets to show that they're interested interested, right, in things about the students other than just their, academic prowess, right, and that they see them as people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really wonderful suggestion, actually. Especially like how he frames it. Well, I'm eating anyway, so I might as well, enjoy the company of some of my students and go do it that way.
And it gives him, because he's been doing it for so many years, it really gives him an interesting perspective, and he, when he's telling stories in his class, or when he's thinking about examples to use in his teaching, he can draw from some of these things that he's learned from these discussions with the students, which he would miss out on if he hadn't done that.
Well, exactly, and so you really get the pulse of where the students are, and you're able to use more relevant examples and then really sort of connect what we are learning to their lives, and that's, of course, really comes back to this authenticity and relevance, and that's really a wonderful way to do it.
Yeah, he used to give, well, he uses a lot of imagery in his slides and pictures, and it's funny because over the years he would start to see students like not responding to certain pictures of maybe actors or musicians, and then he would ask them and they'd be like, yeah, I don't know who that is. So he has to sort of update his examples of people that he's using to illustrate things in his class to people who are a bit more contemporary. So that's also another way that you can learn about that.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah, how especially when we're trying to use culture as an example, culture changes very, very quickly, and that's a great way to keep up to date. Ask them. How do you know what your students need? You ask them, right? Well, Julia, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Really great chatting with you.
Thank you. You too. Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks for being with us today. There was not a lot of time to discuss these topics, so we're going to be putting out a brochure that is going to give you more detail with some tips and tricks that you will hopefully be able to apply in your own teaching and learning online. Thank you.